Here we go. So my goal with these is to give a short presentation, 15, 20 minutes, and then to have a discussion afterwards. What issues are you having? What advice do you have for others? Let's just see what's happening out there around this topic. Are there products out there that work well, ones that don't work well? Let's bring that up as well. So upcoming, I've scheduled three because I just want to kind of see how these go. I really want to talk about acetic acid and how to, why is it a problem? Where does it come from, and how to measure it? Because I think that's a big issue in our small wineries. So I want to talk about that in April. And then in May, I'm going to get Randall Voss to hop on and talk about if we had bud damage, and maybe you've seen his video recently about how to check your buds. What do we do now that the growing season is coming up? What are our strategies in the vineyard, and what should we be looking for, and what do we do next? So yeah, same kind of format, first Monday of the month at noon. Okay. So wine color. Why did I choose wine color as the first? I've been looking at bottling my own wines here at the Iowa State Winery, and I always thought that as a chemist and as I always thought, yes, it's a visual, but it doesn't really impact your aroma, your flavor. So who really cares about color? That's kind of was my thought process before. I really wasn't concerned about wine color very much. But now making my wines, I'm realizing these are the, first impressions that customers have, and it does matter. It does matter. So how do we get the best out of wine color? And what is it? Where does it come from? That sort of thing. So let's go back to grapes. Where does the color come from in grapes? We know we've got green grapes, green little hard grapes, all the way up until I get a laser pointer here, all the way up until Veraison. Okay, no matter the variety, if it's red, white, gray, whatever the variety is, we're gonna have our green grapes. After that is when our color is gonna start to develop, and that's kind of a nice thing in the red wines because we know that Veraison's happening. And so usually color develops in the skins, right? But there are some times when color can develop in the pulp as well, and those grapes are called Teinturier. The grapes that we grow, some of the hybrid grapes, I don't know if you've ever cut them apart. I've done some research with this where I've been, de-skinning and looking at pulp and skins and seeds separately. And those grapes, the pulp is quite colored. I don't know if they're officially Teinturier. Okay. I don't want to go as far as saying that, but there definitely is some sort of bleeding from the skins into that pulp. So I do think that our pulp has some color associated with it, our red pulp at least. And so just something to keep in mind. If one thing we love to kind of say as wine chemists is, oh, red grapes have, colorless pulp. That's not necessarily true with some of the grapes that we're growing around here. Okay, so moving on. Juice. So we're going to take our grapes and we're going to process them. So we get our juice. And so the big thing that we need to be careful about in our juice is browning. And so oxidative browning starts as soon as you're going to start crushing those, or as soon as the grapes break open. So if you are mechanically harvesting, you need to be aware of this, okay? Because you're going to get a lot of broken grapes with that mechanical harvester versus hand harvesting. So this happens enzymatically for the most part. And there's two different ways. There's PPO, polyphenol oxidase, which is present in grapes. There's also, if you have any botrytis on your grapes, which we can have sometimes in the Midwest with our humidity and whatnot, there's another enzyme lactase, which can be even more effective at making those brown pigments. And so why is this important? It can lead to lack of varietal aroma or flavor. It can lead to off flavors, loss of color in the overall wine. The color could stay and be brown and cause the wine to be brown. It is important to note yeast end up absorbing a lot of that color. So I think it depends on the variety and probably what yeast you're using and whatnot. But there are treatments that you can use on juices to prevent that browning and clear up some of that browning. And so was a memo that came out from Penn State, and it's really nice. And I can, try and get this out to you, or maybe put it up on our website or our Facebook page or something. But it was a really nice explanation of juice browning and a study that they did with some um, juice browning blockers or things to fix the browning. And so SO2 does a pretty good job. A lot of us are probably using SO2 at crush as our juice is settling out for that 24 hours usually. And so it's doing a pretty good job. Another one that they brought up, though, that I thought was interesting is AST, which is ascorbic acid, SO2, and a tannin mixture. And so this is a product you can buy. I'm pretty sure it's from Enardis. And let's say you didn't want to use so much SO2 because, we're going to go into fermentation and add yeast, and we don't necessarily want to inhibit or kill off any of those yeasts that we're going to add. So if you wanted to use less SO2, AST might be a product that you might want to try. So, and these three things, they're going to scavenge oxygen. They're going to, bright and correct that color. And also, especially if you are mechanical harvesting, which is becoming more and more popular, it might be a product. I don't know if you can add it to the bin, out in the field. That would be something to potentially ask an artist what they think about that. So white wine color, typically white wine color comes from small concentrations of phenolic compounds. And so our white wines don't spend much time in contact with our skins, but there is some phenolic compounds present, and like our aroma compounds, small concentrations can lead to a color. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Small concentrations can lead to large visual differences in not just white wines, but red wines as well. And I just also wanted to point out, if you're sending away your samples for analysis, either, we don't usually measure color, but we can. But ETS does this routinely as well. When they say they're measuring at 420, they're looking at red and brown hues. And if they are looking at 520, they're looking at the red colors. So that's just if you are getting that analysis done, the difference in what those numbers are telling you. So this is what quercetin glycosides look like. The quercetin is a polyphenolic. It's really similar. You're going to see to the anthocyanin structure, and so. So yeah, just want to kind of hit home that these compounds are all very closely related. These are some examples of what we can see with white wines. You could see some have more of a green hue, some go more towards an amber hue, and then the last two, it depends on the wine style you're making. I would say if these are faulted or not. I mean, sherries tend to be these amber color or things that are oxidized on purpose can have an amber color, but also if they get oxidized by accident, they can also have these, not as attractive brown color. I will say, just from experience of working in the Midwest with our cold hardy hybrids, our varieties tend to have a lot more color than you would expect out of the vinifera. The vinifera, I think, are usually quite light in color in terms of their young wines if they're not barrel aged. You know, Sauvignon Blanc has a greenish tinge, but it's almost, you know, colorless in some examples. Whereas even our, you know, La Crescent, Edelweiss Brianna, they do tend to have a deeper golden color just naturally. And I don't think that's a fault at all. I think it's just a characteristic of the variety.
Erin, can I jump in there real quick?
Yeah.
I had a professor that used to say that that all orange wines were oxidized, and I remember thinking that doesn't make any sense because Frontenac Gris is orange.
Yes. And I think it depends. So it depends on where the color is coming from. Orange wine, the definition of orange wine is an oxidized wine. Well, it's skin contact. I should back up. And I do have a slide about it. Orange wines are skin contact wines. A lot of the times they are made in an oxidative way, where they're placed in skin contact for long periods of time. And but yeah, the definition is technically um but Frontenac Gris is a weird one in that yes, you'll get the colors that are extracted, and I know it's not a long extraction, but the colors that do get extracted tend to be in the orange range. And that may be due to different anthocyanins being present. It may be due to mono or diglucosides. So I'll talk about that in a second. So that's a little bit about white wines. So jumping into red wine, where we talk about color a lot more often. So where does the color come from? So in the skin cells, and the color lives essentially in the vacuole, which is just a big storage unit within the skin cells. So when we have these skins in contact, we need to break up this cell so that we can extract that stuff out. So just keep that in mind. That's what we're doing with our pump overs. That's what we're trying to do with um, uh, leaving the skins in contact, is because we want that stuff to be extracted out of the skins. And so this is just what an anthocyanin looks like. So it's a charged particle. It usually, well, an anthocyanin always has a sugar attached to it. In our hybrid varieties, we typically see diglucosides where a sugar is attached here and over down at this other bottom position. So we have diglucosides in a lot of our hybrid grapes, and that lends the color to sometimes shift a little bit more purple. And it's just a difference between you know, the hybrids and the Vitis vinifera. Okay. So then getting these anthocyanins out is what we want to do. Anthocyanins are very soluble in water. So at the beginning of the fermentation is when we have the most water, okay? Or the mixture is essentially an aqueous mixture. As the fermentation goes on, we've got alcohol, ethanol being produced. So the mixture shifts to it's still an aqueous mixture, but it's anthocyanins are less soluble in ethanol. So you see this big spike. This came out of Purdue and well, it's out of a textbook, but I kind of stole Purdue's picture here. But they so the anthocyanins are extracted really quickly in the first couple of days, and then that amount of anthocyanins will decrease as well. A couple things are happening here. As ethanol is increased, they're less soluble, they're less extracted, but also some of the anthocyanins are being incorporated into tannin structures, and they're being stabilized. That's the word I was looking for. So what happens is we can have these tannin structures that are also being extracted from skins or seeds, and anthocyanins can add to them so that we have a more stable color component. Okay, so the polymeric pigments are stable, and we like this. We want our color to be stable. We don't want to see these decreases. So in our varieties that we are growing and making wine from, we don't have a huge amount of tannin for these anthocyanins to be stabilized. So this can be a little bit of a problem to hold on to that color. You may have, I'm sure lots of you have done fermentations and, first couple days you're like, oh yeah, color's looking great. And then later on when you're finishing the wine up, at least that's how I'm feeling this year. And I'm thinking my Marquette is looking a lot lighter than I thought it was supposed to be. And this is part of it. Okay. So orange wines, Anne brought this up. Orange wines are when we have white wines that we leave in contact with our skins. There's varying reasons to do that. You might do it for a really quick amount of time to extract some aromas and whatnot. We tried that experiment when I first arrived, and I don't think that the consumers could tell the difference very well between skin contact or no skin contact. The thing with orange wines is there's kind of a wide range out there. There's little to no additives added at this point when you're leaving the wine in contact with the juice, and typically no yeast. It's really just kind of a big maceration mixture that you're leaving in a very kind of oxidative way. Now it could be a short amount of time, like maybe a couple days, and it could go on for like a year. I read in some wines. So I don't know if I would experiment that long, but as Anne was pointing out, Frontenac Gris itself, and I'm guessing that this is just the genetics and the particular anthocyanins that are within that grape, give you an orange color anyway. It's not quite a rosé like we're used to. And that again, can we get around that? I don't think so. I think it's just inherent in the actual variety. So they're not. I wouldn't call a Frontenac Gris rosé an orange wine. I would call it a rosé because that's how it's being made. There are ways to enhance color. We can add tannins during the fermentation to try and stabilize those anthocyanins so that there is something to protect them. And they can also help prevent browning and whatnot. So at this point, if you're using tannins at fermentation, you're typically going to use a powder or a small chip. And there's also extracts that you can use, like Mega Purple is the name brand of one. And this is another one that I actually just purchased, which is from Presqu'île. And it's a grape skin extract. I think it's probably very similar to Mega Purple. It might be a little bit different, but these are finishing products to add color. I ran some trials on my own wine last week because I noticed my Marquette was looking just a little bit lighter than I would like it to be. This was at about 0.06%, which is what some articles suggested the winemakers didn't want to go over that. I didn't notice. Now, they were talking about Mega Purple. I wasn't using it Mega Purple exactly, but they didn't notice, or I didn't notice too much aroma or flavor impacts. And the coloring, to be honest with you, it might be kind of hard to see in the picture, but it just purpled it up just a hint. So I may use this. I haven't actually completely decided if I'm going to use it or not. These are really popular in the large scale wine industry. Okay. I don't know what wines have put Mega Purple in there, but I'd be surprised if, something like Apothic Red didn't have Mega Purple in it. Again, they're trying to go for a consistent wine year after year after year. But this is what the product looks like when I poured it out. It's really pigmented, and we were adding really small amounts. I tried up to 4%. I didn't go any higher than that. And to be honest, the color change wasn't very deep, even up to 4%. But I figured if I want to add this, I'm going to add it on the lower end because I don't know over time what might happen in terms of the, integration of all the flavors and whatnot. So I'm gonna go on the lower end if I add anything, just to play it safe. Lastly, I did want to talk just quickly about rosé wine. So this is where, okay, there's lots of different ways that you can make rosé wine. Just pressing off a red is one way. There are other ways of doing it. And I think I'll save that for another lunch and learn. I was, rehearsing in my head and I thought, don't go into too much detail of rosé wine because that's a whole other topic. But you can get a really wide range of colors in terms of rosé wine, and it's due to the variety. It's due to your winemaking protocol. So temperature plays a role in that. Your processing, where did the grapes come from? Or sorry, where did the juice come from? And one thing I just wanted to point out in terms of rosé wine color, because a lot of wineries that I have worked with in the past, that's what they're shooting for at the end. Yes, they want their flavors and aromas, but their very last step on a rosé wine is to adjust the color. And remember that SO2, that final SO2 that you might add, will bleach the wine because it attaches to your color compound, your anthocyanins. So you will see a color change to almost more orange. Like it's probably, I would say you're going from, well, it depends how much SO2 you're adding, of course, but a more cherry-ish, more bubblegum pink to this kind of more peachy color. So just be aware that that's probably going to happen. But yeah, wide range of colors in rosé. And it's, yeah, it's up to you how how you're making your wine and whatnot, as to how that happens. Okay. Stripping color. So this is a topic that has come up in the past year with me talking with winemakers. There's lots of products out there for adjusting color. The one caveat I want to say to this though is I would highly recommend trying to get your color right at the grape processing time. Know what you're going for, know what kind of saturation you want. Try and get your color right at that point because it's a lot more forgiving, let's say. If you're going to be using activated carbon or PVPP or something like that, I always love to remind people you worked really hard in the vineyard to grow those grapes. You worked really hard in the winery to make that wine. If you're going to start adding stuff and playing around, just, do your bench trials and just be very careful that you're protecting your wine because that's the last thing you need is, for something to go wrong at kind of the last minute. So there's lots of different activated carbon products out there. Enartis has a bunch. Scott Labs has a bunch. So depending on what supplier you like to use. Now, a lot of the ones that I noticed for color correction were in a pellet form. And I know talking with a winemaker last fall, it wasn't really working that well. I have not used the pellet forms before. I've used a suspension form, and that was pretty darn good at stripping color out of a rosé. So I would recommend talking to your suppliers. If there's a product out there that doesn't necessarily color stripping or color adjustment, but there's some activated carbon for other reasons, flavor adjustment, whatnot. Ask the sales rep what they think about using that product for color adjustments. It doesn't hurt to ask. But first thing, consult your websites or, I was looking in the Scott Labs fermentation guide or winemaking handbook, that's what it's called. And so they always have you know, your recommended doses and things like that. The other reason to ask your sales reps as well is a lot of the recommended doses may be for Vitis vinifera varieties. So that goes, I would recommend across the board, you know, make sure that these products, um, you can use them for your hybrids and get the results that you want out of them. Because maybe they've done trials, but they aren't necessarily included in the handbook. So activated carbon can work. You usually want to do this with quick contact time. 24 hours or less was one of the products. A couple days, you know, or up to a week, I think was another product recommendation. And that you want a lot of the products as well is you add it in, you let it sit for a day or even a couple hours, and then you add in another product to Gelsol or something like that to fine out that carbon. Activated carbon's really fine. And so a lot of times you'll need another product to settle that out to the bottom. And you do want to be careful because you don't want to be stripping out aromas and flavors and things like that. So, so bench trials, I would again highly recommend to make sure that you're not getting rid of those things you've worked really hard for. PVPP is another one, and it typically these days comes in kind of combination of things. There is, you know, Scott Labs has one called I think it's Polycell is their PVPP, but they've got PVPP added with a couple other things like bentonite in one product and whatnot. So it can help remove browning or bitterness. We're getting some feedback from somebody. Oh, if I can. There we go. So PVPP can, especially in your white wines and or if you've got bitterness, you can use that to help correct some of your those problems. So pinking might come from, you know, using a Gris grape like Frontenac Gris, and you might get a little color towards the end of winemaking from the anthocyanins that may have been present. So the other thing I wanted to say about stripping colors, just be aware, you're probably not doing filtration or bentonite finding to strip color, but it can happen, right? Well, when you're doing those final winemaking steps, you can lose a little bit of color to those processes. And that is what I have. So a quick, you know, dive into color to show you where it comes from and maybe some of the adjustments we may want to make. Again, I would reiterate that I would highly recommend trying to get your color to where you want it during the processing and of the grapes and fermentation and whatnot, because I just think the least amount of adjustments and winemaking additions and products you can use at the end is better.